Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Alright, welcome. We are going to talk about blending. I've got my wet palette here. It's an off-the-shelf commercial one, I guess, if you want to call it that. It's even got the P3 formula wet palette deal on there. Comes with like a pad of parchment paper. You can use any normal parchment paper. I just get the sponge material wet, and then I just set the parchment underneath it so it stays flat. And then once it's soaked through like this, you can see there's still a couple spots where it starts to dry out. That means you probably need to add a little bit of water or work the bubbles down. But that is what you want for a wet palette. You can use paper towels and a, what do you call it, a Tupperware tray to get that same thing. But this is what I have, so this is what I'm going to use. All right, I'll set that aside. We'll talk about paints. We're going to do two different examples of three-color blending. All Viejo today. For the grays, we've got, actually you can use Model Air dark gray, and I actually won't use that because my model's already dark gray, but that's what I would use. We might need to darken a little bit with it. I've got neutral gray, and we've got stonewall gray. All right, those are the three colors we're going to use for the gray. For the purple, we've got royal purple, purple purple, and blue violet. All right, for brushes, I've got a Winsor Newton Series 7, in case you all needed to guess, my favorite brush. I've got an iron, or just a normal Kolinsky 000, which is pretty close to the Winsor Newton. That'll be the wet blending brush. And then I've got a 5.0 Iron Wind Metals beater brush, and this will be a cleanup brush, and I'll explain what all that means because you'll probably see me make a few mistakes. Got distilled water, that's what I've got in my wet palette. And then I've also got just a regular mug full of water to rinse. The other thing that is going to be important is slo-dri. This is a smaller bottle, obviously, but it's Liquitex. You can buy it at any art store, or you can buy, I think you can buy like model grade ones, things like that. But it's just a thicker gel, and that's basically it's all retarder. It's not a glaze medium, but this will definitely last longer as far as slowing the drying of your paints. Combined with a wet palette, it will last a long time. Alright, so let's get started. Try not to shade these colors here. Let me move the lid. There we go. Alright, again, audio check. Alright, how do I pick colors? Some paint companies actually sell the trifecta or the triple pack, the three colors that you can use. I think P3 maybe, I can't remember, but you can even get them in from the manufacturer like that. I think there's even an entire chart dedicated to recommending paint colors. I believe it's a Games Workshop color chart. That's one way to do it. Honestly, most of the time I just do it by looking or by copying someone. So I'll either take what I have on my palette and copy it, or my paint rack I should say, or I'll find something that somebody else did and see what paints they use and give that a shot. And if I like it, great. If not, I might change a shade here and there. PDF swatches are terrible. You really just have to see the paint in person. I actually use an index card or something like that, and I put the paint colors out to see what they look like. Yeah, I don't think Viejo does, and Viejo's got so many paints now that it's actually kind of a mixed bag on different versions of the same color that even have different names. Same color might have different names, things like that. So, all right, let's get some paint on this palette here. And I'm putting down, I think, more than I probably ever really would use, just to exaggerate the amount. All right. So the beauty with this is that you don't necessarily want to add any water right away. The reason being is that wet palette's going to keep the paint damp. I am, however, going to add a drop of slow-dri to each one. And that's not for on the palette. The palette would keep normal paint workable for a long time, but that's actually for when it's on the model. It will keep it workable. There's a nice chunk of stuff in there. Get that out of there. It's a little thicker than I probably would want it, so I probably will add just maybe a little bit. But once you spread out the surface area like this, it will start to take up some of that moisture. So you want to be very judicious about adding water to it. But this is even thick by my standard of putting paint down on a model without using a wet palette. All right, and for the model we're going to be using today, this is going to be kind of a tricky. Try to keep all this in the shot here. Move the light, see if I don't mess this up. All right, so this is a project that I'm doing for a kind of a diorama. This mech is going to be disabled and crashed into a side of a building, but it's gray, so that's why I'm using it. What we're going to do, and what I've done previously, this is actually just primered gray, and then it's got a black magic wash all over it. But if you didn't do the wash, that's why I was talking about that base gray is a pretty good match. You could put that wash over it, or you could take the neutral gray and do a couple of washes and you would get the same level of darkness. That's why it's glossy. It's got that acrylic in it, and that's before I figured out I could put matte medium in it to make it dull it down. So I'll move this over just a little bit, give myself some room. All right. Yeah, I know tonight is Star Wars night, so this probably wasn't the best, but this is the only night I have free this week. I work all week, or all weekend, so unfortunately this is the only time I have, but better to get it out of the way when I have time than not do it at all. So I'm going to add a drop to each one. There we go. And I'll probably just use this generic brush here to mix on the palette, just so y'all can see as I do that. But I'm gonna take my just regular Klinsky brush, and I'm gonna get it damp. I'm gonna leave it just kind of sitting there with water on it, and that's for when I get ready to do the highlight. So I'm gonna start on this foot section here, and I'm gonna lay down some of this base gray just to see how it looks on the model. And that's pretty close. You can see that's, I mean, it's a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to work the most of the surface here just to give me some of that medium on there to wet blend. I'm going to bring my dish of water over here as well. All right. So if anything, I'm going to hit the high side where the light's going to be reflecting off of it. If I want to leave that bottom edge a little darker, I can. The other nice thing about this slow-dri is, for instance, this wet brush, which now has water on it, I can dampen off and I can just remove that paint down from the bottom. And you'll see we'll start doing that as I start to blend, but just make sure to reload it with water or to keep it damp. So now I've got that first layer. And you can just take the next color and start out on the high side, or the side you want highlighted. I shouldn't have picked a round surface. I got too much to work from an angle change here, but we'll press through it. I'm not being particularly careful. So then you can, or you can also do this, you can pull a couple colors together and get a mix of the two at different ratios. So now I'm going to take a little bit of that and go between them here. And it's going to look a little odd at first. You're going to have some harsh lines, things like that. Now I'm going to take that wet brush. I'm going to smooth out that dark transition on the bottom side. Just need a little bit of dampness to the brush. You don't want it overloaded with water. And I'm just working that paint All right. So now you'll start to see there's a bit of a gradient already, but you can see there's a harsh line up at the top. So let's work that. I'll use that brush like I said I was going to. I'm trying not to have to wash so many brushes so I can keep working here, but let's take a little bit of the stone wall and mix a little bit of the neutral. And see, now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different colors to work from on this palette already with 3 colors. And even then, you've seen me in previous videos take just white or a gray and add that to get a 3 color out of 2. So if you were maybe messing with purples or whatever, you could use just white instead of having to have that lighter gray. It's not always a requirement. All right. So now we'll take this, we'll go on the high side here. And the other thing is you really don't want to try to get it all at once. You kind of have to work a little bit of both at the same time. So I'm going to go grab that middle tone real quick, and I'm going to hit that middle dividing line. Doesn't need to be a lot of paint. Back to the damp brush. And I'm just working it up to the high side. If I get a little paint on the loader on the bristles, just wipe it off on your paper towel. And as you can see, I'm working it towards that edge that I want to get all highlight. And you may get some of these little tide lines or where it's maybe partially dried. That's no big deal. They're easy to touch up. You just do the same thing again using the intermediate color or the base color and then put another layer of blending. Basically what this does is it gives you a true layering effect, and you're trying to basically just blur those lines between the different colors. Alright, so I'm going to go back to this mid-tone again. I'm actually going to add a little bit of water to my brush before I do it. I'm going to hit this high side. So that's where most of the light's going to go. So I'm not even going to go all the way back to that outside because it's a curved surface. And if you're quick enough, you can wash the paint off of that brush, or the same brush you just used, and now you can use that to blend. So you don't have to necessarily always use 2 brushes. I just think sometimes it's convenient to not have to go back and forth all the time, load and unload paint. Probably better for your brush anyway to care for it better so you don't necessarily keep mashing it in. Now I'm going to grab the pure stone wall. I'm just going to do that high edge. So I want that to catch some of the light. It would anyway, naturally. Then I'm going to go down to the mid between the two, leaving the paint that I already had on my brush. So I'm working this lighter color anyway. And this center point here I think is going to be the part that gets the most light, so I'm just going to drag that down a little more. Rinse my brush, hit the mid-tone, which is the neutral gray. Back in the middle here. I'm going to hit the 50-50 between the base gray and the neutral gray. You see now, it's got a nice blend to it. Now the trick is, don't do too much. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? So if you mess with it, you're going to wish you hadn't. The key now is to let it dry. So go work on a different panel, and then maybe if you want to accentuate the highlights here, or if you want to maybe touch up a spot that wasn't as smooth of a blend, or maybe you decide you want to, fix whatever it might be. Let this be. You want to let it dry. Remember, it's got slow dry on the paint now, so if you go and you put water or anything wet on it and reintroduce it, it's going to activate, and you're going to end up with tide lines, and it's going to blur your blend. So patience is the key, and really it's just management for the miniature that you're painting. So if you've got other panels to paint, move on, go to the next one. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit and let you all get a better look. All right. Do you guys want me to continue with the gray, or would you like me, or maybe do a flat surface? More gray? All right, because I do have purple to do as well. All right, let me demonstrate either a flat surface. I'll either do this edge here, or maybe I'll work on this arm. Oh, there we go. There's a nice flat spot on the back. Let's just do that. All right, I'm gonna check the paint real quick here. And you may, that's the other thing about wet palette I will add, is that you, as you let it sit, it will kind of start to separate. So you do need to go back. I use a brush handle, and I just stir the paint, and I'm actually putting a little drop of water on there too, just to kind of get them a little bit thinner. And they are thinning out slightly as well as I go, like I said they would. But this helps keep the pigment and the slow dry and the water all together, because you really need all three to work to have the paint perform the way you want it to. All right, so again, I'll just start with this base gray again. You wouldn't necessarily have to if you've already got this color on, or they've done this, but you can see it almost matches completely with the wash and the gray. So if you want to skip that step, or it's not the color you want to start with, or you don't have the color, no big deal. So now I'm just putting the paint again, working high side, leaving this bottom part unblended. So now again, I'm going to start at this high edge with the neutral, and I'm just getting this media on there, and I'm actually kind of feathering the brush a little bit to do some of the work with the blend for me. So even without having to do two colors, I've already started a bit of a gradient. Now I'm going to grab the 50-50, and again, you can change these ratios if you want a little darker or a little lighter, go 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or whatever. It's a little thin. I got a spot where there's a little bit of water. To the neutral gray. And you can use the paint to pull, but as you see when I do that, there's going to be a buildup right here, because as I release, that tip of brush is going to want to go that way. So if you do anything like on a flat panel, it can help to actually go perpendicular to the direction of the shadow, and that way it'll naturally help smooth out those colors. So now I'm working the 50-50 stone wall and neutral, as well as the pure stone wall now at the high edge here. And I'm just doing a basic light source. It'll probably end up being this side, but for the demonstration here, I'm going to probably just focus on just showing the technique. But And it's up to you on how much of a gradient you want to do. If you just want a small edge gradient, that's perfectly fine. If you want to do the whole panel, that's what that watered down brush technique I showed will do. So I'm coming back in here with this neutral gray. Rinsed off my brush. And I'm going to hit this end real quick because I like the gradient down low that it has. And then I'm going to hold this paint up a little higher, especially in this left side direction. It's just working the paint on the panel and being patient when you want to let it dry once you get to an area that you're happy with. If you maybe don't work as fast and you want to let it dry in a couple of phases, maybe start with the 2 colors and then move on to the third color, that's perfectly acceptable too, just as long as you let it dry. Now I'm adding in that stone wall. I'm just doing this left edge here. Come back into that middle tone. I'm actually not even cleaning off the brush. I'm leaving some of that stone wall on there. That'll help just blend on the brush. A little more trouble with it right there. And then back to that neutral gray. All right. There we have it. Now if I want to darken up that right side of the topped curve edge, I could, because to kind of go in a little bit more symmetry with the bigger panel that's darker at the bottom. So you don't have to just stop with highlights. You can work back down to dark as well, or maybe even go and add a bit of a detail wash like you've seen me do before, where I go back and darken certain areas. Thanks, Dak. How's the stream holding up? Is it pretty good? I'm paying for extra bandwidth. I'd like it to be getting my money's worth. Awesome. Good. Otherwise, I'll be calling the internet service provider. Well, if you guys would like me to work on purple, I can move on to purple now. I can always come back to this. I basically blocked out about 2 hours for this time, but if I get done earlier or whatnot, I know it's Star Wars night and there's Monday night or Thursday night football on, so I'm kind of competing with the popular audience. All right, move this palette over here so I can use this other side. If you get drips of water or drops of water on the top, you can either move them off with your finger. You can even dab them with a towel. You don't want you put your paint on the palette and then have a big old bottle or a drop of water or whatever, or maybe even more, a pool of water on there, because then it'll leak in, and I've had colors merge together and all that good stuff. So just be mindful of that. But my gray paint over here is just going to sit there, and I guarantee if after I'm done with this video I want to go back and paint gray, the paint will be just fine. So you guys making me do this video made me bust out the wet palette I haven't used in over a year. So congratulations, you got me doing stuff I don't normally do. All right, we got royal purple, purple, and blue violet, which I don't know about the whole blue, but it's definitely violet. All right, adding a drop of slo-dri. And guys, if I miss your questions, hopefully Dak is answering them. This video should save, and I should be able to have the chat be reviewable as well. I missed the setting last time. Hopefully, I should have saved it right this time. Of course, if I say that, probably maybe jinxing it, but I'm doing my best. I'm going to end up adding a little bit of water to these. I'm just putting a drop of water on the end of my brush. Just adding a little bit. Like I said, it will thin out some on its own. Glaze medium will work. It's just I think it dries a little faster. So if you're trying to do a several color blend, you know, it might not necessarily give you the desired result. But I've actually been using it lately as a retarder, and I'm fine with it. But if you're not experienced, then maybe you know, maybe only try to do 2 colors and things like that. But it definitely glaze medium will definitely slow the drying of the paint. I don't know. I haven't done a time test or anything on whether or not it'll slow more than slo-dri, but you would not be in danger of having the paint dry immediately. Well, again, sorry about it. Shiny. This has a magic wash on it that I did, and then I started doing the blending. So this one's about half done. I've done like one side, and I haven't done the other. All right, we're gonna hit the top of the head there anyway. So since it's got a decent panel on it, so I've done on this one here. If you can see, I've done the light sources is coming from the mech's left. So the upper left corners and the upper edges are what I've highlighted. You can see the tip of this triangle and the top edge and things like that. So it's difficult to try to keep it all in the same direction, and then to not necessarily highlight something like you know, normally the light wouldn't hit in between the legs here, but I'm not going to not highlight the panel. So, you know, I just kind of made do with that. And that's where people kind of get into the difficulty of what to and what not to highlight. And once you start to get a feel for it, you maybe would highlight the top side brighter and then work gradually as some of those areas that may have a little bit of shadow. And then in the darker ones, you would only do just a small variation, maybe not use your lightest color, or maybe subdue it a little bit with a wash or something along that line. So even I don't necessarily do that all the time, but I'm just letting you know that there is a wide variety and a wide range of techniques and desired results that you can really get into when it comes to panel highlighting. And then once you get pretty good at it, you'll start to notice it doesn't take as long. It is time consuming. Don't think that I'm saying, oh yeah, it's easy, you can get it done quickly. It does take longer to do it, especially on something that's got umpteen million panels like this thing. But you know, once you practice a little more, I've already done the blue and the purple, by the way, so those are already highlighted. But once you do get a feel for it, you'll notice that you'll maybe want to do it on some of your nicer models, or maybe a showpiece or a contest entry. But that's where we are so far. Again, sorry about the shininess. I should have dulled this down before I started. But all right, let's get going with the royal purple. Now this one, I definitely want to keep more of the original purple. Let's see, let's find a good angle. Let's try it right there. So I'm going to put this base purple down, not necessarily even covering the whole panel, because the whole panel is already the color of the darker shade that I want. I'm going to work 2 at a time here. But as you can see, that royal purple, you really don't notice much of a color change, and that's good. If you have a color that matches your base color, especially after you've done maybe a wash, that will help, because when you go to touch something up, it already matches and you're not hunting for the right shade. Speaking of which, I didn't blend my purples. I'm already letting you all down. Alright, so now I've got essentially 5 colors, and you don't necessarily need to have the 5 colors. It's just a technique that I like to use because it gives me more of a ability to do gradient. I might actually end up only using the 3 primaries on this, but if I want to touch something up and it's not quite dark and it's not quite light, then I can use that intermediate option. And it's because it is of the other original colors, it's going to look, let me move this here, it's going to look correct because it's the same colors that you've already incorporated. Just for all y'all's awareness, this is not easy to paint this angle either. All right. So I'm working that hard left edge and the upper area. I'm not being super particular about the blend just yet. Just want to get that initial paint down. And then I'm going to go in and grab, let's do the high side first. So I'm going to grab this intermediate highlight color. And hit that higher edge. I'm not even going all the way down. I'm just doing about midway. And that high edge is definitely going to catch most of the light. Then I'm going to throw the pure, what was it? Blue violet at the very top. Okay, now I'm just going to rinse my brush real quick, and I'm just going to start pulling that color. I think I got a little in between there on the recesses, but let's try this. How about that? Let's try that angle. So right now I don't have any paint on my brush. I am just moving what's on the panel and hasn't dried yet due to the slow dry with just a damp brush. Yeah, sorry about the late to tilt it back. I apologize. It's hard for me to see this as well, so I'm trying to be able to see what I'm doing and show you all at the same time. So now I've loaded that intermediate on there just to go in between and maybe not go all the way to the edge. Take it down a little more down to this further down because now it's a little more subtle as I get down on this side. Now I'm going in that intermediate, which is just the plain, not intermediate, sorry, the mid-tone, which is just the purple. And now I'm going to lay that right smack dab in between the dark side. Ha ha ha. It's a little, it's not quite thin enough. That's another issue you'll have. If your paint's not thin enough, you'll get tide marks as you lay the paint down. It won't take much for you to realize that it's not properly thinned. You'll see the strokes, the brush strokes. I'm just pulling this upward into a lighter color and then assessing where it looks like it might need that intermediate, that blend, the 50-50. Okay, I need a little right here. So I put that down, quick rinse of the brush, and then just stroke over the two to get that transition. And again, if it looks like you're starting to get a line, like on this left panel here, it's got a line. This one over here, it doesn't. So this one I'm going to come back and touch up, but I've got to let that dry. If I continue to try to mess with it, it's not going to get any better. The good news is I can work on this high side and not touch that side and still keep progress. So I'm going to touch just that blue violet. I'm going to hit that very high side one more time here because I want to really get that high color. I'm going to go back and touch the 50-50, not unloading the brush, and basically just go just the slightest bit inward. back to the just damp brush. Just work that thinned paint. And this is another spot too. You all have seen me use glazes. You can do this highlighting, and then you can put a glaze over it, and it will tie it. It will help tie it together. So you don't even necessarily need to be able to just paint this color. So for instance, I'm happy with this overall, and I do have a little bit of tide mark variation here. So all I would need to do is mix up a thin purple glaze using probably that medium tone, because I don't want it to go too high and I don't want it to be too dark. So probably just that regular purple, and I can layer that on there as a glaze, and it will help tie those colors together. I've done it on some other miniatures, dragon wings, the skin, things like that. It's really great for flesh, but it doesn't preclude you from doing it on this. Let's try to refocus here and get... There we go. You can see I got a little bit in between that panel line there, but that's not too big of a deal to touch up. But I'm gonna add a little water to this purple too, because as I said before, I think it's a little thicker than it needed to be. Re-agitate all the paints here and try not to forget about rinsing your brushes off too if you haven't used them in a moment, or you've used them for something else, blending a color, and then you set it down, you get into blending. That's a good way to have paint dry on your brush. Even with slow dry, it can still dry out. Alright, so I'm going to go and use some thin, I'm going to add a little more water to this. So essentially what I'm doing now is I'm thinning out this dark to mid-tone, and I mean it's pretty thin. And I know I'm not using glaze medium, but I'm going to try to demonstrate what I was talking about with putting thinned purple. And you don't see now, you can just go right over the middle part of the area that you were trying to blend, and it's going to really help smooth out some of those transitions. And the nice thing is you can go back after it's dried again and put another layer on, and again you're still using the purple that's supposed to be in between these two colors, and it's not going to overpower or look out of place because it's already a part of this natural gradient. Because it's so thin, you're going to get some of that pigment to kind of help dull or blur the lines in between the two. But what I am going to do is try to fix that little spot there that has the tide mark. You'll learn that you can push the paint in certain directions to get it to do what you want and lay in certain areas. And even sometimes just a little dab, like you're not really even doing a brush stroke, is the answer. All right. It's really hard to get a good angle with that. I apologize for that. Alright, so now I've covered a bigger panel. Let's talk about what to do with these little tiny ones here, like on the arm. In fact, let me see if I can zoom in some more. Find a good spot with a focus there. What I'm talking about is these little thin panels on the arms here, because you see I highlighted these little thin ones with the color. But you know, you're not going to need to go with 5 gradients on a bigger panel. Bigger panels are harder to make a nice blend look because you can't just hide it with a little bit of an edge highlight and maybe a medium tone blend. These, you know, I mean, this isn't by any means a big panel, but you know, the larger it gets, the more you want to make a transition, the harder it will be to keep it smooth because you've got a larger surface area to show your mistakes or to show the difference between the two colors that you've got on there. So for these little ones, these are actually easier. Now, easier in the sense that you have less paint to deal with, but harder in the sense that you got to keep your brush in that confined little space. So model placement, how you hold your miniature, is important. Now, I'm a righty, so if I were to go and try to put paint on it like this, the tip of my brush would hit that red panel. Okay, so I have to orient the miniature in a way to allow me to highlight, because I want to highlight this top edge here and not get paint here, and to, you know, hopefully prevent it from really getting into this recess. But what I definitely don't want to do is have to redo the red. So what I'm going to do is actually put it this way, because it's easier for me to hold the paint, or the model I should say, and hold the paintbrush and hold it this way and let the tip of the brush come, you know, if I start at the middle of the panel and work outward, than to try to get it right from the other angle, and then maybe the tip of the brush gets over here onto the highlight. So thinking about how you hold the model is yet another thing that you can add to your arsenal of tricks. It also helps too. I'm holding this, but I also wanted to set the base on the table so that it doesn't move as much. And again, I'm going to do 2 panels at once. Just putting that royal purple down. And now I'm not even going to bother with the 50-50 mix because it's such a thin panel. So I'm just going to stay on the high side here, just basically practicing drawing a straight line. I'm going to grab the blue violet. Now, let's see how much is on there. I don't want too much paint on the brush. You want to just work in a little bit, because again, you can get in trouble with letting paint flow into the cracks. And now I'm just trying to stay on that high edge. And I'm not doing it perfectly. I know I'm kind of getting some, almost like a sketch effect with the brush strokes, but they're towards the middle of the panel, which is easier to get to than the ones on the outer edge. So as long as you get that outer edge, once you get it, leave it. So now I've got that high tone on there, and now I'm just going to work that middle again with the just regular purple. Yep, still had a little bit too much of the blue violet on there, so I'm going to damp brush. I'm going to try to wipe some of that away and go back to darken it a little bit here. But see, now I'm working away from that area where I didn't want to get unintentional paint. So despite the mistake, I'm not repainting red right after this. And then once you get that edge, if you need to turn the model to get a better angle, because I naturally paint straighter this way, and I have a camera blocking most of my view, then, you know, move it as necessary. But, you know, just try to think about those areas where you want to just get that perfect detail and not have to, you know, if I were doing this or whatever, I probably would have messed up and already gotten it on the red by now. I just know how I potentially be klutzy. Also, limit your caffeine. I know that's probably asking a lot for some folks, including myself, but if you have too much caffeine, you will have a little bit of a noticeable shake, which is not ideal in painting details. I started this miniature like several years ago, so I'm glad to get it finished, but I'm also trying to match what I did previously so I don't look like I'm highlighting two different ways, you know, maybe over the whole panel versus just part of it like I had done on some of it. All right. There we go. That's how you do the thinner ones. I didn't have to use 5 colors. I only used, which I won't say, I only used 3. I mean, I haven't done an actual tutorial on using a wet palette. This was the first time I've used a wet palette in at least a year, probably 2 years. So what I did was, at the beginning of the video, I talked about this being the privateer press kit and how to keep the parchment paper from drying out. This is it's pretty damp. You want to see that. I use distilled water in the palette. Don't use tap water because it's going to have microorganisms in it. And if you want to leave this for a long amount of time, that won't work to your benefit. I have had this mold up on me once, and thankfully I was able to clean the stuff out of the sponge, and it was fine. But you know, use distilled water, and if you know you're not going to use it, don't forget about it and leave it in your, you know, wherever hobby room for months at a time, because it will start growing stuff. Yep, absolutely. There are some easy examples of homemade wet palettes. Just the little lunch sandwich Tupperware deals with some folded paper towels. All you need is parchment paper. That's the key, is having the parchment paper. After that, you can get a kitchen sponge and some other stuff and make it. You can use paper towels, whatever. As long as you have a container that can seal airtight, these are easy to make. I just bought this because it came with a pad of parchment paper, and at the time I didn't know what parchment paper was because I was single and uninformed, I guess. But once I realized and looked at a few tutorials, you can buy a big old roll of this stuff and never run out. I just cut it to approximately fit. It will stretch too, so if you cut it just to exact, the parchment paper will stretch a little bit. Other good way to get it completely soaked is put it underneath the sponge and then soak the sponge in the water or anything like that. That'll keep the parchment flat, because if you put it on the wet surface like this, it's going to start to curl up, and then you're fighting trying to get, because you want this all to get wet, and if it curls up, you're going to have dry edges. And in fact, once a wet palette starts to dry out or not have enough water in it, these edges will start to flare up and dry out, and that's really a pain in the butt to keep it damp, because it'll curl and your paint starts to move because it's no longer an even surface. Yeah, and the paint will walk as well, so don't think that if you put, you know, a couple colors close together, that by the time you come back the next day, they're not going to have taken a little trip into Mergeville. So that's why you saw me kind of space them out a little bit. Not only that, just because I wanted you to see the color and the blending of the intermediates, but also because if you put them ... I mean, these would have already merged together, and you can see how the purple's, you know, doing its little dance there, a little closer together. Yeah, it's just simple. It's just a simple piece of, I think it's 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch foam, and I just make sure it's soaked completely, and then I put the parchment paper underneath it, put the soaked sponge on top of it, and then wait about 3 or 4 minutes, lift it up, take the parchment out. It'll be just like this. Put it on top. It'll stick right to the sponge, and then put it in, and then fill up the last little bit up to this where you can see a little bit of the water. And I like to use I have a water syringe. You can use a dropper bottle, but I'll add the water just to get it up to just barely get to that surface so that it doesn't lose the edges and start to curl on me. More gray? All right. I can do a little bit of that. You can see now this paint is definitely thinner than when I started, so it's glad that I didn't add too much water to it. Yeah, this one might not make it to the end of the battle. Alright, so we've done a foot, did the back panel. You want to see a torso panel or chest panel? Right there. About the top of the leg, do you want me to do all these little high raised detail areas? Or do you want me to do like the arm that has a bunch of little small details on there? Just let me know what you want, Conrath. Alright, we'll do the legs. And bring the zoom in so you can see a little better. Yep, that works. This is going to be Ghost Bearer, I think, Delta. I think it's gray with the the light blue highlights. It's just something that's going to sit in the background into the crashed building. That's a small like miniature diorama I wanted to use for taking photographs that I've been sitting on my shelf for, I kid you not, at least 10 years. Really have a poor record for getting things done in a timely fashion. Alright, so I'm just laying the base gray down on all of these. So I'll do corner highlights on these, but these are just going to be a little strip of lighter color. Since these ones on the back are all going to be similar, I'm going to do those first, and then the ones on the high side there will be a little brighter, so this just keeps it so that I'm working with the same color concept. All right, Conrad, how does that look? Probably smooth out those top side panels a little more, but I think the rest of it looks pretty good. No problem. Happy to do examples and help out. Plus, it gets me to actually come out here and paint miniatures that need to be painted. So that didn't take too long. And if you once you get a feel for it, you can work multiple panels at once. You know, it really shouldn't be too daunting. Again, even if you're not using 3 or 5 colors, you can do this with 2. You really can. And then you can do it with glazes like I've demonstrated before. So there's multiple ways to get a very good result that doesn't involve just basic dry brushing. And you can even dry brush ahead of time to kind of give the edge highlights. And then you could use a blend or a layer or a glaze to bring that highlighted edge down to a darker color that is where the recesses are. There's a million different ways to paint these things based on skill, paint available, technique, whatever you want to call it, willingness to spend a lot of time. So, you know, that's why I'm doing these. I'm trying to show as many different techniques as I can because I've had to learn all these things as I've gone as well, and I'm certainly by no means, a only one way type of person. There's, many different ways to solve a problem, and sometimes I don't want to spend as much time on a certain area and work on something else in a different technique. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you spending the time here watching me paint. I appreciate the comments. If you're not already a follower on Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, please subscribe and all that good stuff. I appreciate you being out here. Please post comments and or suggestions for me in future videos, either on YouTube or on Facebook, and I'll try to accommodate as best I can in a timely manner. You guys all have a good evening. I appreciate you coming out. Thank you.